Chapter 16, The Attack, Revision. In the previous life, it was the Yanji Marquis mansion of Zhou Yinzi's check. Later, Shen Ju ascended the throne and rehabilitated the Marquis of Yanji. Later, Zhou Yinzi was killed by Xie Wei's arrow, and his head was nailed to the palace gate. It can be seen that he has done nothing good. This person is bent on power and high position, and always unscrupulous means to achieve his goals, but he is careful and cautious in doing things, and it is difficult to be caught in the wrong place. This is the reason why Zhang Xuning used him in his last life. It's just that in this life, she doesn't even want to enter the palace, and having too deep a relationship with this person is tantamount to seeking skin with a tiger. But at the moment, the other party is the only channel for her to understand the situation of the Yanji Marquis mansion's involvement in the old case of King Pingnan, and there is also a Xie Wei who doesn't know when to pick her head. Even if she doesn't want to contact her, she has to contact her. I hope that in this life, I can get rid of mundane disturbances and get the kind of freedom that Yu Fangyan said. She sighed in her heart, got back into the carriage, and said, "Go to the upper floor." Asterisk. By this time it was getting dark. In late autumn, there are traces of wild geese. There are not a few people left drinking at the top of the building. Chen Ying, who was promoted to the waiter of the criminal department half a year ago, played with the wine cup with the wine, and was idle, but said, "Jin Yiwei has always only obeyed the dispatch of the saint, and it is probably the intention of the saint to investigate the Marquis of Yanji's mansion. Those remnants of the Pingnan Wang party have been imprisoned in the prison of the criminal department for several days, and they can't try anything. Young master, you are always by your side, can you order the lower officials, what do the saints want to know from their mouths?" Chen Ying is a well-known cool official in recent years, and his methods of torturing prisoners are very cruel and even inhumane. But because of this, he has solved several major cases, and his local political achievements are very good. This even includes a part of the major event of ending the rudder of the heavenly sect in Jiangsu. It's just that he also likes to figure out the minds of the people above. Doing things under the nose of the Son of Heaven, sometimes it doesn't matter what the truth is, what matters is what the emperor wants to hear. The man who sat opposite him had neither a feast nor entered the palace today, so he wore only a simple white robe with wide robes and large sleeves, which was not worthy of any ornamentation, and even his head was bound up with an ebony hairpin without any shape. He didn't look up at Chen Ying at the moment. At the top of the table lay a freshly made lyre, which had passed the previous 11 steps, as bright as a mirror, and full of goose feet, while he lowered his eyes, pulled the strings, and carefully threaded them one by one. Chen Ying's eyes flashed, and he said, "Our saint looks generous, but Chen feels in his heart that the saint is too suspicious." Xie Wei put on the first string, and then wrapped it around the goose's foot on the right side of the back. Chen Ying couldn't help but look at him, "Like you, young master, how can you say that you were also the hero who assisted the Holy Lord to ascend the throne back then, right? But right now, you are only a young master who has no real job, and you are not a Taishi. If you really want to care, you have the reality of an emperor, but not the name of an emperor." But the circular machine monk who had never done anything before, the saint not only named him a national teacher, but also let him take charge of the Ministry of Rites, and the official was still a scholar. If Chen has 1/12 of your ability, he can't bear such things. Isn't there really half a point of grievance in the young master? Xie Wei's fingers are the fingers that were born to stroke the qin. The nail cover is clean and transparent, showing a warm look. He didn't stop threading the strings, but said, "Chen Chilang is cautious. The saint is the 95, how can the Son of Heaven speculate in his mind?" In the past, when the circular machine master was in the holy mansion, he sat down with Wei and discussed the Tao, and his Buddhist attainments were by no means in vain. It makes sense for the saint to crown him as a national teacher. Thunder, rain, and dew, all are Junen, why is it unfair? Chen Ying laughed, and seemed to disagree, whether it is fair or not, the government and ambition have a number in their hearts. You pointed out, this person, how should the lower officials be judged? Xie Wei said, how to try it, how to try it. Chen Ying frowned, if you can't try it. Xie Wei said, Lord Chen can't be tried, and he feels that he can be tried to take over. Chen Ying's heart suddenly froze, and he already had a plan in his heart, so he put down the wine cup and shook his body. Mr. Xie pointed. Xie Wei continued to put his head on the strings, occasionally plucking them lightly and trying them out slightly. The sound from the building was choppy. The sunset in the west covered him with a soft glow, but it couldn't change his color by half a minute, and could only stretch his figure behind. Chen Ying knew that he had been making this piano for 3 years, and he cherished it very much, and now when it was time to put on the strings, it was enough to be able to take care of him in a few words, so he naturally saved inches, and did not stay longer, bowed, and then took his leave and went downstairs. After Chen Ying left, the sword book that had been standing by the side with the sword in his arms was tightened. His young face was not impulsive, he really thought about it for a while, and then hesitated and said, Sir, let them check like this. Xie Wei said, it's not Chen Ying, there will be others. The sword book was silent. After a while, Xiao Er came up downstairs, with a lacquer plate full of wine and food. This master, the things you ordered have arrived. Jian Shu said, how did our husband order something? The little second looked surprised, didn't the master who just went down help to order it? This little two ordinary people look like an ordinary person, but they look very raw, and they speak with a little Wu Yu accent that is not very obvious. When did the floor have such a little too? Jian Shu suddenly felt that something was wrong, raised his eyebrows sharply, drew his sword out of its sheath, and shouted, Sir, be careful. Whoa! When the sword book spoke, this little Er knew that he had been exposed, and the pure and kind face he had pretended to be immediately turned into a hideous and ferocious, and he directly pushed the wine and food full of lacquer to the sword book, and pulled out a 1.5 foot short knife from the bottom of the chessboard, and attacked Xie Wei directly. Death. Xie Fang hugged the piano and got up. This person's short knife had arrived, and he only heard a broken sound of zhang, and the 4 strings that had been worn had been broken by the tip of the knife. There is also an extra knife mark on the piano. His calm and gentle expression suddenly became cold. Asterisk. Shijia Hutong is not too far from the floor. Zhang Xuning felt that Yan Lin should have arrived, so he only asked to park the car on the side of the road diagonally opposite the building, and told the coachman to go to the building to ask for someone. But she never expected that the coachman had only been gone for a while, when a black shadow came from outside. I saw a flash of the snowy knife, and the short knife was pressed against her neck. Before Tanger, who was also in the car, could scream, she was slashed on the back of her neck by this person, lost consciousness, and fell at Zhang Xunning's feet. At this moment, feeling the coldness coming from his neck, only one thought popped up in Zhang Xunning's mind. Suffer 1,000 cuts. The surname Xie really wants to kill the palace and destroy it. Soon, however, she realized that something was wrong. There seemed to be a shouting sound from the building opposite, someone shouting to search inside and out, followed by a jumble of footsteps. Someone replied that no one was gone. Zhang Xuning couldn't see what the person who held her hostage looked like, she could only feel a slight tremor in the hand holding the knife, as if she had just experienced a fierce fight, and she seemed to be as nervous as herself. Soon, footsteps approached the carriage. One person stopped in front of the car. Zhang Xuning listened to the voice and said, "Is it Ning Er in the car?" Only Xie Wei would call her second Miss Ning. Even if she didn't recognize this voice, she could also tell who was speaking. For a moment, the heart was racing. The knives resting on her neck were mostly assassins. Xie Wei is to arrest this person. The other party did not make a move, presumably judging from the driver of her car. The identity of the person in the car was at least not ordinary, and he wanted to take her hostage. Ostensibly her life was threatened by the knife-wielding man, but outside the car are even more terrible devils. This situation is much more terrible than simply encountering Xie Wei and killing her. Because Xie Wei could have killed her in the name of killing the assassin or the rebels, and then pushed her to the rebels afterwards, or allowed the other party to take her hostage without meeting any of the assassin's conditions, and deliberately waited for the assassins to kill her. In this way, even the cover-up and explanation are saved. There is no more worry-free and more worry-free way to die in the world, which can make Xie Wei completely disconnected from her death. At most, say I can't catch it, and no one can blame her. Zhang Xuning only thought about it, her scalp was numb, and she didn't dare to look back at the assassin with the knife, and after the other party pushed her, she immediately said with a trill, "It's me." Xie Wei said again, "You're the only one." Zhang Xuning couldn't figure out what the assassin behind was thinking, so she didn't dare to answer. The assassin laughed gloomily, "Of course she's not alone." The servant next to Xie Wei reacted too quickly, so that he failed to assassinate him, and people around him immediately rushed up to arrest him. As a last resort, he fled, and only this carriage was a hiding place. Xie Wei can assist the Emperor of the Dog without virtue to ascend the throne, and he has some insight ability, and it is not unusual to guess that he is in the car, so there is no need for him to hide it. On the contrary, he vaguely heard that Xie Wei actually knew the girl in the car. In this way, there is something to talk about. Touched Zhang Xunning's neck with a knife, and he asked her, "What do you know with the surname Xie?" Compared to the one outside, this assassin was not actually the most dangerous. Zhang Xuning had already revealed a flaw in front of Xie Wei, for fear that this time he would see something and take the opportunity to kill himself, plus he was also afraid, so he said in a trembling voice, "Recognize? No. 4 years ago, I saved Mr. Xie's life. Although I don't know where the strong man is sacred, but I have something to say, please don't be impulsive." This was said not only to the assassins, but also to Xie Wei. Thinking that at the end of her life, in order to keep Zhang Sha and return his reputation in the first life, she used the favor of many years ago, now she has only been reborn for a few days. I didn't expect to take out the favor so early to save my life. Xie Wei stood outside the car, separated from the people in the car only by a hanging curtain. He was not surprised to hear the assassin's voice. It was Zhang Xunning's remarks, and after hearing this, his eyebrows moved slightly, and he felt that there was something playful. There were no pedestrians around, and the streets were full of slaughter. Jianshu looked at the car with a cold face. Xie Wei glanced at another young man next to him who was wearing a strong suit with sleeves and arrows on his back, waved his hand very slightly, signaling him to go, and then said directly to the car, "Not bad. The second girl Ning has the grace to save her life in danger, and her father is friendly with danger. The strong man is dissatisfied with the imperial court, which can be regarded as a matter of public affairs related to the world, and now holding a girl who is ignorant of the world is inevitably suspected of hurting the innocent. Take the rebel party and the savior, and choose the latter when it is dangerous. If you want to let Ning Er, you can order someone to get a letter of order, so that someone can open the city gate for you and send you out of Beijing safely." Nonsense. Zhang Xuning didn't believe a word. It's just that she is controlled by others, and she can't speak rashly. And in front of Xie Wei, he didn't dare to open this mouth. The assassin didn't expect that he was so lucky, and casually broke into the carriage and grabbed Xie Wei's former life-saving benefactor, so he laughed. It seems that God favors me and wants to let me live. I only heard that young Master Xie devoted himself to Taoism and was not close to women, but he didn't expect that there would be times when he cherished the fragrance and cherished the jade. Since you say that this is your life-saving benefactor, and you want her to be safe, it is simple, why don't you exchange her? Wouldn't it be better for me to coerce you out of the city? Otherwise. His voice was stunned, but it was suddenly extremely ruthless. Lao Tzu has slaughtered this with a knife now. Zhang Xuaning's back was full of cold sweat, and she scolded this assassin in her heart for being stupid. Not to mention that in the previous life, whether it was the Pingnan King Rebel Party or the Tianjiao Rebellion Party, it was all folded in Xie Wei's hands. This pig's brain was too far behind. Can Xie Wei believe what he said? Also counted on using her to threaten and let Xie Wei replace her. Xie Wei must be willing, she can take off her head and walk in her hands. There was silence outside. The assassin was impatient. I've said a few times, if you haven't thought about it. You don't have to count. Xie Wei's quiet voice interrupted him. Zhang Xuaning's heart suddenly rose to her throat. Then I heard him say, please send second Miss Ning out, I can replace you. Zhang Xuaning. No matter what she thought, the assassin was already overjoyed, but the legendary Emperor Xie Wei was also confused, just thinking that people wanted to live, and even negotiated conditions with him. As everyone knows, since he made a move, he didn't want to go back alive today. Letting Xie Wei come for this woman is just a cover, and taking the opportunity to kill people when the exchange is close is his real purpose. You, lift the curtain. He ordered Zhang Xuaning viciously, and the knife holder did not move away from her neck. Zhang Xuaning moved slowly, leaned forward, stretched out her hand, and slowly opened the curtain. The reddish light of the sky poured in. So I saw that Xie Wei was standing 3 feet away in front of her car, with indifferent eyebrows, deep eyes, a wide robe and big sleeves, and he was not stained with dust. The facial features are extremely good-looking, but at the first glance, what everyone notices will always be this restrained bearing, deep and mountainous, calm, and hidden 3 points of weight. It reminds people of the mountains, the sea, the saints who sang in ancient times, or the hermits who picked roses in the mountains. His gaze fell on her across the void, peaceful and profound. Zhang Xuaning shuddered. She suddenly remembered, in addition to a sword book and a good sword besides Xie Wei, there is another sword and Qin who does not like to talk and is good at bows and arrows. If you look at it again, there are tall towers outside. I'm afraid that the moment the assassin leaves the car and is in plain sight, he will die. It's just that I don't know if Xie Wei will dispose of her very by the way. The assassin behind her also glanced at it, and only said to Xie Wei, tell your people to retreat to 30 zhang away. All the swordsmen with swords looked at Xie Wei. Xie Wei waved his hand at them, then looked directly at the assassin and said, please rest assured, you dare not put the lives of your benefactor and your friend's beloved daughter in danger, and if you are willing to let them go, you will never hurt your life. Everyone retreated, leaving only Xie Wei in place. The assassin said, come forward. Xie Wei stepped forward. When he was only 6 feet away from the car, the assassin told him to stop, and then grabbed Zhang Xuaning, who was restrained by him. Zhang Xuaning really didn't want to go down, God knows if there would be an arrow through her head after going down. But the knife is on the neck, and if you don't get down, you have to get down. At this time, I had to go on. The assassin carried her all the way, and then slowly approached Xie Wei. Zhang Xuning was trembling all over. She felt that Lord Yama had already stood outside and knocked on the door. Unexpectedly, when she finally approached Xie Wei, the assassin pushed her without warning, and directly raised his knife to slash at Xie Wei. Xie Wei's face didn't change. In the midst of lightning and fire, Zhang Xuning felt that this was an opportunity, and immediately rushed to Xie Wei without hesitation. She didn't believe it, there was a Xie Wei back, and the one who drew the bow upstairs dared to aim at her. A sweet cold fragrance came to his face. Xie Wei calculated the assassin's move, but he didn't expect Zhang Xuning to fall down. The corners of his eyes twitched slightly for a while. Fortunately he was not slow to react. Before she pounced on herself, he reached out and helped her, and also separated the two from the sharp distance. At the same time, there was a sharp whoosh in midair, and there seemed to be a bowstring reverberating in the quiet and dangerous air. Arrows shot up from the top of the building. At this moment, Zhang Xuning's pupils shrank sharply, thinking that he was going to die. However, the next moment, a snow-white patch stood in front of her eyes. It was Xie Wei who frowned, raised his hand flatly, and raised his wide-sleeved robe to block her. Zhang Xuning was stunned and couldn't see the front. In my ears, I heard the sound of an arrow piercing a human skull, like through a crispy watermelon. Then I saw a few red shadows of blood splatter out and land on the clean sleeve robe. Shocking! The assassin's knife was only 2 or 3 inches away from Xie Wei at this time, and the hideousness on his face had not yet retreated, and a feathered arrow had been inserted into his eyebrows. The whole root penetrated into the skull, and the arrow pierced through the back of his head. It shows what a terrifying force the archers used. He was carried backwards by the arrow, and when he took his last breath, there was still a little disbelief in his eyes. Xie Wei was indifferent, only glanced at it, then let go of the hand holding Zhang Xuning's arm, and also lowered the hand that raised the sleeve robe. Zhang Xuning stood firm on her own, without a sleeve robe to cover it, and only then did she see that the assassin had indeed been killed by the arrow. Looking up the next floor, a young man in blue with an arrow bag on his back had put away his bow by the railing and retreated into the shadows. The ground was red and white, and there was blood and brains. If it weren't for Xie Wei raising his sleeves, these would definitely be covered in her. Zhang Xuning stood aside, just smelling the smell of blood. She felt sick to her stomach, and her face turned pale, so she didn't dare to look at it again. All the guards who had retreated first hurriedly rushed back. Someone went to check on the assassin. Jiansha walked directly to Xie Wei's side. Xie Wei's left sleeve robe was already covered with blood, and even the slender hand with a clear bamboo was stained a lot. When he saw it, he took out a clean brocade from his sleeve and offered it with both hands. "Sir." Xie Wei took it, but when he rolled his eyes, his gaze fell on Zhang Xuning's ear. He looked at it for a moment, and then handed it out. Zhang Xuning was stunned for a moment. Consciously raising her hand, her fingertips touched a little sticky, and when she put her hand down, she saw that there were a few traces of blood splashed on her earlobes. "It's creepy for a while." She was terrified. But just now she didn't succeed in pouncing on him, and no arrow fell on her, and at this moment, when she saw him hand out Jinsa, she was even more frightened. After hesitating for a long time, her long eyelashes trembled, and then she carefully stretched out her hand, took the Jinsa from Xie Wei's hand, and said in a low voice, "Thank you, sir." Just now it was forced by the situation. Can. Now. Because she was embarrassed by him as self-respecting in her previous life, she was very cautious. He only took Jinsa, but his fingers did not dare to touch his palm. However, the brocade was snow-white and soft, made of the finest silk, and when she took it away, a corner hung down, but from Xiaowei's palm, it seemed to pass through nothing. Xiaowei's long fingers curled up slightly as if spasmodically, and at the same time he saw the shallow scar on her wrist when she stretched out her hand, and faintly felt the smell of blood in her mouth from a certain desperate situation. He withdrew his hand, took it behind him, and held it weakly. At this time, he looked at her and said, "Let the second girl Ning be frightened." Zhang Xuning wiped the blood stain on her ear. The campa was stained with blood. She lowered her gaze. "Fortunately, I met an adult, knowing that you must have a way to save you, so it's okay." "Really?" Seeing that she wiped the blood stains and held the jinsa in her hand, Xiaowei stretched out his hand to her, but said lightly, "But I just heard that the second girl Ning mentioned the old kindness of saving her life in the car, but she was more afraid of danger and did not save it. It seems that she is in danger." Zhang Xuning was almost half frightened when she heard this, and forced her composure to say, "I don't dare not answer the assassin's question. I have no idea for a while, and I am afraid that he will kill me at will if he thinks I am ordinary. Yes, is it wrong?" After saying that, she saw him stretch out his hand, so she hurriedly handed the jinsa back. Xiaowei took the jinsa back from her hand, and used the white silk that had been stained with blood on this side, slowly and carefully wiping his left hand that had just been splashed with blood, and lowered his eyebrows and stopped talking. The silence made Zhang Xuning's heart beat a drum. Seeing this, the sword book on the side glanced at Xiaowei, and silently put away the other party jinsa, which was about to be handed over. After a while, someone came to report, "Young master, Yan Shizi is outside the street and wants to come in." Xiaowei wiped it for a moment, looked up at Zhang Xuning, and said, "Sword book, send second Miss Ning over." Jian Shu responded, "Yes." Zhang Xuning held her breath and saluted Xiaowei, and didn't dare to ask her what the situation was with the maid in the car, so she only followed the sword book through this long street and went to Yan Lin's side. After the two left, Dayakan came down from the upper floor. "I held a piano in my arms." Xiaowei took it, raised his hand to stroke the broken strings, as well as the knife mark on the body that penetrated deep into the belly of the Qin. There was no expression on his face, and after a long time, he said, "The corpse was sent to the criminal department, and Chen Ying was asked to come to see me."